meeting. We have a pretty full agenda again tonight. We'll take public comments if there are any before the meeting. And if you'd wish to do public comments, there's a sign-up sheet for that. And then Rob has some really interesting tax rate comparisons and charts and graphs and regarding fiscal capacity and price of government work that we've done over the year that he's going to walk you through. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about our priority-based budgeting process that we use to inform our budget and try to identify the programs that the city provides that produce the best results for the community. Then we'll just kind of have an open discussion, see where we are, see if there are any questions that we need to continue to work on. And I'd like to get your feedback on the public engagement plan that was handed out last week, if you had any comments or questions about that. Otherwise, we'll probably proceed with it as it is written. So there you go. I think I'll turn it over to Rob.
Yeah, public comment? All right, go ahead.
Looks like we do.
Since we only have one speaker, should I keep the time at 3 or 5?
3.
How much?
3.
No, make it 5. Huh?
Go ahead.
All right, you guys. Good evening, everybody. We have a new member of the task force, so I have some information at the first meeting that I handed out. I'm going to need to try to get to you about our original financial plan for this city when we incorporated. Tonight, I just wanted to follow up on a couple of comments Rob made at the last meeting. And one thing, I had to actually come down here 2 times during the meeting last week because the microphones weren't being used. And so everything that Rob was saying was not being recorded. And it's very important for the public here to follow this process because the end result of this process is we're going to go out to the voters and ask them to raise the tax levy limit and pay taxes higher than legally allowed. That's really the goal of this thing. So, and as we do this, we want information that, is clear, objective, understandable, factual. So a couple things Rob mentioned last week was that he pointed to the road fund and he said, we don't have any money in there except for this gas tax and we have to go to the general fund. It's kind of like we're robbing the general fund to pay for road taxes, and that's not the case. So I gave you the page 113 of the feasibility study, which shows you, I highlighted there, it says, working from our premise that the city of Kenmore will provide for virtually all its operations in the general fund, the revenue Kenmore would receive for road taxes will be transferred to the general fund because, where I didn't highlight, says the maintenance, road fund maintenance should be paid out of the general fund. Just to keep things simple, all our operating expenses, they suggested should be in one fund. The city put it in 2 funds, but all of our revenue from road taxes is in the general fund, which is a political issue that the city council denies. But if you add up all that road tax for the first 20 years, it's over $100 million. So that's a big issue. The second issue, he talked about we only have 40 employees and that Montlake Terrace has about 200. So I gave you page 60 of their budget for 2019, 2020. It shows you they have 133 full-time employees. And it says up above, throughout the year, they'll have as many as 280 temporary part-time workers. But they have a utility district, and they have their own police force. We're supposed to be a contract city. So you're not, nowhere near doing apples to apples on this analysis, okay? In addition, you see in parks, they have like 37 people. They have a pool, right? So that's a huge difference for lifeguards and things like that. Just doesn't compare to the staffing needs that we have. Our feasibility study said, and I'm sorry I didn't give you a copy, but I'm going to give you guys a copy in the email of it with a summary. I haven't finished the summary yet. I'm almost done. we had 13 employees, 13 and a half, and contract for everybody else. That's all we could afford. Okay, city's abandoning that. They don't want a contract, they want employees, which the plan says we can't afford. That's why we're gonna need to raise taxes. And we've also used all this road tax money in the past to really build administrative operations. And so we haven't been maintaining our roads, which our reports, if you'll ever get into it, you'll see we've neglected that responsibility. And that's a big liability that we're facing. So I'll email you that report this week with a summary so you can follow it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. All right. Yeah, and Darlene and Lynn, I don't know if you guys got a chance to meet each other, but Lynn was her first time last week, and Darlene wasn't feeling well last time, so just introducing you to each other, I guess. Yeah. All right. John helped me make my point just now. Like, the reason I brought up Mount Lake Terrace last week was to demonstrate that the two cities are not apples to apples. Mount Lake Terrace is a full-service city as compared to Kenmore, which is a contract city. So similar population, but very different number of employees because Mount Lake Terrace has all that stuff in-house. So, whereas we are a contract city. Okay. A couple things I want to do. One thing I want to do is just highlight something that we talked about last week, and that's the difference between operations and capital. So, whoops. So under operations, you got things like maintenance of our parks and our roads and our buildings and all those things. And we have things like police services and land use planning, building permits, public safety, those types of things. Those are what we, these are the expenditures. It's what we spend our money on. And then under the revenues, under operations, what kind of revenues feed our operations? Anybody? Yeah, permit fees. Permit fees, what else?
Sales tax.
Sales tax. Yeah, sales tax. Property tax.
Franchise fees?
Yes, franchise fees. Utility tax, which is very similar to franchise fees. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Utility tax.
Do we get anything from gas tax, or does that all
Yeah.
go to the state?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, we get some gas tax to help pay for our roads. That goes to our street fund, our street operating fund.
And is gas tax, is that only the gas that is sold in Kenmore?
Now, it gets distributed from the state on a per capita basis.
Okay.
Yeah. Great questions. I love it. So operations pays for this day stuff that we have to do every year, right? On the other hand, though, there's capital. Capital. So what are some examples of capital expense? They're one-time.
Waterways and walkways?
Yeah. So let's say parks, like new parks, buying.
Buildings?
Second. I don't know why that's doing that. Okay. Yeah, buildings. Building, and that is new buildings or remodels of existing buildings. New roads. I'll get out of the way here in a sec. New sidewalks. That sort of thing. What about fixing a crack in a sidewalk? Which column would this be on? Operations, yeah. So think of capital as one time. Things, another one would be yeah. So under operations, that would be the day-to-day maintenance of our systems and the testing and all that. Under capital, it would be building a new stormwater pond or putting in 100 feet of new pipe or things like that. Yeah, so new pipe.
When you have capital projects, do you ever build in what potential costs would be for maintaining that project
Yes.
in the initial?
Yeah, that's good practice. Do we do it all the time like we should? No. Have we been doing it more lately? Yes. Cities are really attracted to bright, new, shiny things.
Yeah.
And we want to build bright, new, shiny things. And there's all this great money out there for building the new things, but there isn't a lot of money out there for maintaining the new things. Okay, so these are the expenditures. These are the things we spend the money on. So what are some examples of capital revenue, one-time revenue?
Grants?
Grants, yeah. Grants, what else?
Bonds?
Hmm?
Bonds?
Yeah, bonds, like going into debt.
Does that actually, is it just terminology? Is that revenue, or is that usually called revenue?
Yeah, we issue the debt, the debt that gets deposited into a fund, and we count that as revenue, yeah.
Well, I think technically we call it a resource.
Yeah.
You know, it's really not revenue because
I'm
you
just
have to pay
thinking
it
of all
back.
the businesses that would love to
Yeah, it's like,
count their debt
okay, it's
proceeds
cash
as
in
revenue.
now, cash in now, cash out later to pay for it.
Another one is impact fees. We consider those one time because those are associated with new construction. So anytime a new home or new building is built, you have to pay on a one-time basis an impact fee. There's transportation impact fee, school impact fee, and park impact fee. And those are to help pay for capital only. Impact fees are not allowed to go pay for maintenance. They're not allowed to go in this column. They can only pay for shiny new. So we have those impact fees that are paid by developers or by builders when they construct a new building. Another capital revenue source is REIT, real estate excise tax. We consider that one time because it only happens when somebody sells their home. And state law says that REIT can only pay for shiny new things. There is one exception. A couple of years ago, they changed the law saying that about up to $100,000 a year can go for maintenance. The city collects a little over, well, between 1.2, 1.5 million a year in REIT. And so from that 1.5 million in REIT, 100,000 of that can go to operations. We haven't chosen to do that yet, but it might be something we look at where $100,000 a year could go to REIT. Right now, we have it in our capital improvement plan. We have all the REIT programmed out going to pay for shiny new things.
Would you say that, or like, as far as funding new development, we've talked a lot about the shortfalls on the operations side, the road fund and things like that. We
Yeah.
haven't talked a ton about how much money we have as a city. So like when we're making a decision
Yeah.
on well, should we move 100,000 from this capital fund? It's like, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense because it seems like we have such a shortfall in operations, but do we also have similar pressures in these capital funds, or do we have, from these things that can only go to capital funds, enough to kind of cover the development plans, or kind of what's the general sense?
Yeah, there's definitely pressure on both sides, especially in today's construction and bidding climate. We are seeing bids for capital projects come in way higher than we ever anticipated. For the West Sammamish River Bridge, this was 2 months ago now, so I'm trying to remember the numbers, but I believe that the engineer's estimate and our budget was 26 million for the bid amount for construction. The low bid came in at 32.5, and our engineering firm, Jacobs Engineering, which is one of the largest engineering firms in the world, they were shocked. We were all shocked. We didn't have a choice. We have to replace that bridge, and so we swept other capital revenue funds to go in to pay for it. But that's a whole other story. But anyway, so yes, the answer is yes. We're seeing pressure on both sides. The other thing is when it comes to road maintenance, asphalt overlays are considered capital. So they're just replacing old asphalt, but they're considered capital. And so REIT has been helping to pay for asphalt overlays. Now, things that aren't, the type of pavement preservation that's not considered capital are crack seals and slurry seals. So it's like filling cracks and then putting the paint over, kind of like what we did in the Uplake neighborhood last summer. That's spent out of operations. But asphalt overlays are spent on the capital side and under REIT. One reason I'm giving too much detail here, but I hope this is helpful. One reason that asphalt overlays have to be considered capital, number one, they actually contribute to the structure of the road. And number two, whenever you do asphalt overlays, that triggers ADA ramp improvements. So the federal law says that if you're doing an asphalt overlay, that's considered a structural improvement, and therefore you have to bring all of your wheelchair ramps up to the standard. And what drives me crazy is, we may have put in new wheelchair ramps 5 years ago, and then we go to put in new asphalt, and the feds say, oh, those ramps you put in 5 years ago are no longer our standard, and so you now have to rip those out and replace them. And I'm like, what? We just put them in 5 years ago. Sorry, we decided to make the ramp slope even flatter. And so pretty much every time we do an asphalt overlay, we just automatically assume we're going to be ripping out the wheelchair ramps because the federal standards constantly change. Okay, that's probably way too much information, but now, this is one time, this is ongoing. Now, can things like sales tax and property tax and these things go to help pay for capital? Yes. And sometimes we do have general fund money chip in for capital. And can the reverse happen? No. These kind of revenues can't help pay for operations, with that one exception I mentioned in REIT. So, okay? Like I said, the focus of this task force is on the operating budgets, but it's important for you to know what's going on in capital because it gives you the context.
Is the general decision so far to not use that $100,000 allotment?
So far,
because like the city knew it had so many capital expenditures coming up, right? Like
Yeah.
the bridge. right, you knew like, well, we're gonna need every dollar that we can? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing is, like I said, the bridge bid came in super high. We also just bid out the shell house, the rowing shell house. And the overwhelming majority of that is being paid for from non-city sources. So the school district's chipping in $250,000. We got a state grant for $600,000. We got a county grant for $600,000, and we got a state grant for $250,000. And the city council's position has been for the city not to chip in too much of its own money for the shell house. But guess what? The bids just came in 300 higher than engineer's estimate and our budget. And so in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be asking the city council, what do you want to do? Because if you want to build this thing, you need to find $350,000. And so if this continues, we're going to be going out to bid on 68th Avenue Walkways and Waterways Project and Juanita Drive Walkways and Waterways Project. And I'm absolutely convinced that our engineers' estimates are low because all the bids are coming in high. And we're competing with cities like Kirkland, who are building like crazy, and we're competing with Sound Transit, who's building like crazy. And City of Seattle has a big ballot measure where they have to spend $900 million for their new road projects. And then there's the Connecting Washington money where they're building new state projects. And so we're just a little player competing with all this and trying to get the attention of bidders to want to come and do our projects. And they're like, oh, well, yeah, okay, I'll do your project, but it's going to cost you an arm and a leg because I got plenty of work out elsewhere. So it's not the best climate to be building stuff right now because everybody's building. So, okay, I just wanted to kind of cover that and give you guys additional context. Any questions about that? Oh, I know what I was going to say though. So I'm really worried that our walkways and waterways projects, the bids are going to come in high, and that's going to put even more pressure for it to use every bit of REIT that we have and things like that. So it doesn't mean that we can't ask for some REIT money to come over here, but you know, we're just trying to figure out how to pay for everything. All right. Okay, so this, I just handed this out and emailed this to you guys recently. There's a bunch of charts in here, and no one chart is the magical chart that's going to tell the whole story. We're going to go over a bunch of charts today that just give you additional context. Think about this as a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and these are just tiny little pieces of the puzzle that you're putting together. So this first one is comparison of us compared to our neighbors on revenue per capita. And what we're doing here is we're really only looking at three main revenue sources. These are Kenmore's three largest sources of revenue and make up the overwhelming majority of our general fund. And that is utility tax, sales tax, and property tax. Those three revenues make up the bulk of our budget. Yes, we get permit fees and other miscellaneous fees from the state, but this really makes up our most of our general fund revenues. So we said, well, let's compare our three largest revenue sources with those of the other cities. And this gives you an idea of where Kenmore stands per capita. So we took all these revenues and divided by the population of the different cities. And look at Woodinville. What's going on with Woodinville? They get
Wine.
wine. Yeah, they get sales tax from wine, and they have some big box stores too. So Mill Creek does not have any utility tax at all. We have some utility tax, but it's relatively small. But you can see where Bothell and Kirkland and Lake Forest Park shake out. So of these cities, we're not the worst off, we're third worst. And then this is just a general fund revenue per capita. So it's similar to this graph, but it includes all the revenues. Wait just a second. Actually, I'm trying to figure out the difference between these two graphs. Yeah, these still have the same revenue sources. Well, pardon me on that. I don't know. Maybe I duplicated the same graphs. Okay, so. And this is just those three taxes just broken out so you can just see them side by side. This is an interesting graph. It takes those three revenue sources and just puts them on a 100% scale. And you can see how dependent we are on property tax compared to sales tax. And you can see where the other cities land.
What's responsible for the difference in mix between Bothell, Kirkland, and Kenmore? Like the property tax amount seems low for those cities. Is the property tax lower? Do they have like fewer homeowners? I find that hard to believe.
So on this graph, it's not that their property tax is necessarily lower. It's just that compared to sales tax, it's a lower proportion.
But in the first graph, it's
per capita.
The per capita is a lot lower.
I think in some of the documents that he sent via email, the population of Woodinville was a lot less than Kenmore. So I don't know if that's what you're asking in terms of that translating.
That would make you think that the per capita would be higher, because if your assessed value,
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
is higher because of all the commercial.
And if it doesn't matter, we can move on.
No, I mean,
I thought it
it's
was
a good
interesting.
question because, very likely we're going to be talking about property tax, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's, maxing out as much of our legal property tax, or even to the extent we ask voters to vote on an increase in property tax. That seems to be our biggest shovel to dig us out of the hole. And so looking at the chart where it says, we're at 268, 269 per capita, and that's the second highest per capita on the list. That just seems like another place where it's like, it's hard to go to voters and say, hey, how do you like being second highest? How about being the highest per capita?
Yeah,
There's
good
not
point.
much we can do about that because, opportunities to make that orange get bigger are very limited. But
right.
but that is the question: is why is it that Bothell and Woodinville and Kirkland Bothell and Kirkland can be so low?
Yeah. And my apologies, I don't think this is the correct graph. There's something wrong here with this graph because Bothell's and Kirkland's property tax that's not correct, but this I'm certain is the correct graph because this shows the property tax per capita. That makes a little more sense.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we have expenditures per capita. And in this case, we did just general government, public safety, and other as the three categories. And this was a little tricky because we had to get apples to apples comparison, meaning cities like Kirkland and Bothell have an in-house fire department. So we had to take out the cost of the in-house fire department plus an estimate on overhead associated with that fire department. I think fire department was the main thing that we took out. to get apples to apples. But as you can see, now does this mean that these cities are bloated and terribly managed? No, it just means that they're probably doing more stuff. Like they may have more parks and more rec and things like that. And then we just did, I don't know what's going on here. I apologize. I should have looked at this more carefully, but I think this might be the same graph. This work was done about 9 months ago, and I was just pulling it up. Okay. And then another measure on fiscal capacity is assessed value per capita. And this is amount of property value per citizen. And you can see where we land with the other cities. And then you can see sales tax as a percent of property tax. Just kind of gives you another picture. Kenmore, Mill Creek, Woodinville, Bothell, you know. So the sales tax poor cities are Kenmore and Lake Forest Park. It shows that we're residential cities and don't have a lot of sales tax. And then we have sales tax per capita. We're of our neighboring cities, we're one of the lower ones on sales tax per capita. So once again, Woodinville just blows us out of the water. They're about 5 times as much as we are per capita. So, okay. Any questions on these? All right. Let's see if I can navigate this thing. All right. It's got the utility tax. All right, thanks, Tila. Okay, so this just focuses on 2 things, utility tax and franchise fees. So utility taxes are pretty straightforward. Like when you pay your electric bill or your gas bill, you pay a utility tax. And some of it goes to the state, some of it goes to the city. The city has a 4% utility tax on electric and gas, 0% on garbage. And what was I going to say about that? On gas and electric, the max allowed by state law is 6%. And like I said, we're at 4%. And then, so you have utility tax, which can just go right into the general fund and pay for anything. It can pay for parks and police and all sorts of things. Then you have franchise fees, also charged on utilities. And a franchise is the right for a utility to do business in a city. So for example, Comcast, for example, we have a franchise with them. They can only exist in the city of Kenmore because they have a franchise agreement with us. And the franchise agreement mainly about how they can have facilities in our right-of-way, and their ability to use our streets and our poles and things like that. And if they need to dig something up, our franchise agreement talks about under what conditions can they dig stuff up, and then how do they restore it back, and all that thing, all those types of things. But often in a franchise agreement, there's also a franchise fee that's supposed to go for the city's cost of operating the franchise, the company's wear and tear on the city's facilities and infrastructure and things like that. And that also just goes into the general fund. So when you hear franchise fee and utility tax, they're 2 very similar animals They're both charged on utilities. They both get deposited into the general fund. But some utilities have a utility tax, and some utilities have a franchise fee. So like the water and sewer, they don't have a utility tax, they have a franchise fee of 5%. Like I said, Comcast has a franchise fee of 5%. What other franchise? Yeah, Frontier. That's also our cable and phone.
It's been a while since I actually looked at my Comcast bill. It hasn't gone up yet, so I haven't needed to call them yet. But of those taxes, how many of them are just straight pass through, if any, that just get passed through to the customer?
All.
All of them.
Yep, and they'll even say, here's your bill, and here's Kenmore franchise fee that they put right on in the line. One thing about Comcast is we're not allowed to tax the internet. We can only tax video and phone. So, yeah.
Do you have stormwater utility
Yeah.
taxes?
No.
No.
No, yeah, so we have a storm water fee, but we don't have a utility tax on stormwater. Yeah. So,
Hold on, I want to go back to that comment on the internet. So the franchise fee Comcast pays / passes on to customers only on TV and internet, or sorry, only on television and phone, and
I
then
believe that's, yeah.
and cable. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So and the we're not allowed to assess taxes. That's where does that come from? Is that state or
Federal.
federal law?
Federal preemptions. Yeah, and one thing we're seeing is as people go to things like Sling TV and it all becomes data and not video or not TVs, we're seeing a reduction in our revenues. If you remember, Steve Toller showed that one slide where our utility taxes and franchise fee were on the decline.
And
Yeah.
and this is something I'm just curious about, but I've heard of communities similar to Kenmore that do their own broadband or like hire a firm to come and manage broadband separate from these for-profit companies. Is it would the revenue structure be similar in that there's nothing that would have to operate as nonprofit and nothing of that would be able to ever come from the general fund if it was a municipal internet provider?
Oh, yeah, so if we took over cable TV or
Obviously,
internet,
this is a big
Yeah.
change, but just curious.
yeah, like the city of Tacoma did or things
Mhm.
like that. The only thing that could do to benefit our general fund is we could charge overhead to it. Like, okay, now I'm spending part of my time dealing with our city municipal internet company, so I can charge some of my time, and Joanne can charge some of her time, and that's the only. Do you agree with me, Joanne?
As
Yeah.
far as I know, I haven't really
Yeah.
gotten into the broadband service provision yet and how you can benefit from that, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so utility taxes, let's just go to, remember there's utility taxes and franchise fees. They're different, but they're the same. This is just utility tax rates, and we added up the totals, just the raw totals across gas, electric, phone, garbage, those types of things. In the spreadsheets I sent you, you'll see the detail on the actual rates. You know, so like for garbage, it'll show Kenmore at 0 and another city at 6, and you know, things like that. So our utility tax rates are relatively low among our neighboring cities. And then these are franchise fee rates. And we're not super low when it comes to franchise fees. And this, again, these are the raw totals. In this case, it's 3 5%ers. It's 5% on water, 5% on sewer, 5% on cable. So that's why we're 15%. Okay, so then if you take all of our utility tax and franchise fees combined and take all those raw totals, you can see where we're at. So, because I think it's only fair to show utility taxes and franchise fees together since they're so similar. And then this chart, all this was done by our graduate student last year, and he took actual revenues from these cities for their different franchise fees and utility taxes. And then on a biennium, which means a 2-year budget, he said, okay, well, what are they paying per capita? And this is how we shake out on a per capita basis on utility taxes. So in the data, another thing he does is he does a weighted average based on how much revenue is collected, and you'll see that chart as well. But so these are just some ideas on, or some thoughts on where we stand on taxes. These types of taxes are what we call councilmanic, meaning they can be increased by city council approval, and you don't have to go to the voters for franchise fees or utility taxes. So, all right. Yeah, Lou.
So, Rob, can we conclude that the reason that Woodinville's utility taxes are relatively low by comparison is because they have a very large contribution from sales tax that allows them to maintain a lower utility tax?
That would be my conclusion. Yeah.
Or alternatively, you probably have your big box stores paying the same rates on your utilities, but they don't have a capita, so they're adding to the numerator but not to the denominator, right?
That's a really good important point, Jeff, is per capita isn't really always the best way to measure things because cities are so different. So cities like Bothell, they have Canyon Park and all those office developments. Those are all office buildings that are providing revenue, but they're also demanding services from the city as well. So per capita isn't always the best match. Sometimes we try to use assessed value as the denominator. We just try to, it's hard to get really good comparisons because cities are so different. But
Rob, do we know how much revenue it would generate if we charged the 6% tax on garbage?
I don't have that number right now, but
Is that something that Steve is looking into as part of?
yeah, so we'll have all those numbers at a future meeting.
I think we analyzed that a few years ago, and it was several $100,000.
I think it was more like 180 or something like that.
Yeah, it's close to, probably by now, at least a couple $100,000.
Yeah, so.
We don't really know what their revenues are as part of that would be taxed.
Well, I actually contacted Republic Services and asked them, I said if we had a 6%, I actually used 6% because that's kind of a standard number. And I said if we have a 6% utility tax on garbage, what would that be? And they gave me the number, and it's in an email from several years ago that I can track down. So.
One of the interesting things I was thinking about here is, as someone else pointed out, these utility taxes are really indirect taxation of individuals. It's completely a pass-through. So I think at some point we'll have to start thinking about tax equity as an issue here. Because if you're looking at different types of taxes, property tax, which is income-based, versus something like utility tax, which isn't, you get into potentially a tax equity issue here. No position
Yeah.
on that, but I think it's something we have to take into account.
Regressive.
That we get into a
Yes.
progressive taxation issue. Yes, exactly.
Thanks, Mike, for bringing that up. Yeah, because you have people with fixed incomes who are, you know, have to pay their gas bill and their electric bill, and if the fee goes up, they're, you know. And so there are cities that, like Bothell, for example, provides a rebate or a discount for low income. There's administrative overhead to administer such a program, but such programs do exist. Does Kirkland have one? Do you know? They do? Okay. Yeah.
Do we have any taxes that, rather than doing a rebate, are just progressive? Like, I don't know if, it sounds like property tax is just based on, your portion of the property tax that you pay is based on your home value, but it's a linear scale, right? It wouldn't be, it's not a, like if you're,
Yeah.
if you're twice as much, if your home is twice as much, then you pay twice as much property tax, not 3 times or 4 times as
Right.
much, right? Okay.
Yeah, I think of our taxes that we have available to us, property tax is the most progressive. Washington State does not have an income tax. What's another? Oh, sales tax, you could argue, is progressive because the more money you spend and have, the more you pay. And we don't tax food in this state, so.
But it's progressive only in that the more, but it's still linear. It's not like income tax where your marginal dollars at the high end of income are taxed at a higher rate.
That's right.
And this is just where I'm trying to get my bearings on what the art of the possible is. And I understand that there are limitations to how much we can increase property taxes. But if we were, again, thinking about this regressive thing, and because if we just do a blanket increase in property tax rates, then that's going to increase the property tax on the low value homes as well as the high value homes. And so if we wanted to kind of disproportionately say, well, we want to increase taxes more on the higher value, can we do a more progressive, like higher marginal rate at those high? Is there any reason why we wouldn't be able to do that?
I don't think state law lets us do that.
I'm not aware
Yeah.
that we can.
I've never heard of
I
that,
don't
but
believe we can.
creative idea. We can look into it.
Seems like something that should be not too difficult to answer.
Yeah.
Just something to.
I'm 95% sure the answer is no, but we can double check it.
I think that's why. other
It sounds like
jurisdictions
something
look
that would be
as
restricted.
a way of,
Rebates.
yeah, that's a way of doing that. It's not an efficient way to go about collecting taxes, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
given the art of the possible, it may be the only way.
It may be the only vehicle, because there are property tax exemptions, for low income and seniors, et cetera, so.
And the income threshold for that exemption just got raised to 58,000 per year. I was at 40 for years and years, and the state legislature just ramped that property taxes exemption up to 58,000 as the income needed for the exemption. Okay. All right, so now let's look at some financial health ratios. For the most part, this shows Kenmore doing pretty darn good. So one way of measuring financial health is how much debt do you have? And this compares our debt to our total assessed valuation. And you can see where we stand. Bothell went into quite a bit of debt for all their downtown revitalization. So that kind of shows that. But again, we're among the lower of the group here as far as debt goes. Here's the debt to population, similar graph. Here's AV over assessed value. I think I showed that graph earlier, but this is another way to look at it. Assessed valuation over total population. So again, we're second to the lowest. Shoreline is second to the lowest. when it comes to assessed valuation. So even though property taxes are number one revenue and it's our biggest source of revenue, we're not even that rich when it comes to property tax, or at least our assessed valuation. This captures what happened in 2017. So these are from the state auditor's reports, and this is a one-time snapshot of what happened at the end of the year in 2017. Kenmore had an operating surplus, so we were about 11-12% of our general fund expenditures turned out to be surplus for us. And there's Woodinville for you. They're taking wheelbarrows of money to the bank. Looks like Bothell actually spent more than they took in 2017. Lynn, the short conversation we had last time about how Kirkland kind of intentionally underestimates sales tax. What do you call it again? The lag? Or something
It's
like that?
the 2-year lag. So if we're budgeting for 2021, the revenue that we can budget for is 2019 actual sales tax. So you can only report on 2 years ago. You can only estimate on 2 years ago.
And is that a council policy? Or?
It's a council policy. I've actually had the same 2-year sales tax lag in other municipalities I've worked for. They are discussing if that's the right way to go forward. It helps a lot in a good economy. It helps protect you when the economy turns bad, because you have much more time to react than if you're projecting for actual right now.
Mm-hmm.
So.
The reason I bring that up is maybe that's why Kirkland, that's one contributing factor to Kirkland's surplus in 2017, is because they probably underestimated tax. So, all right, so looking pretty good. This having a surplus like this at the end of each year is a result of conservative budgeting. So we conservative on our revenue forecasts. Joanne doesn't get too aggressive on how much revenue she thinks she's going to bring in, and all of our department heads are pretty conservative on the expenditure side, meaning we probably budget for a little more than we actually use during the budget cycle. And so that's why we have these windfalls. And then what we can do is we take that extra money and we build up our balance, or we send it over to, does everybody remember? Strategic Opportunities Fund. That's what I call the extension of the general fund. Okay. All right. Let's see. Did I talk about that one? Oh yeah, this one's interesting. How much do you have just sitting in your piggy bank? How many days of cash investment do you have on hand? And these look at looks at the general fund and then all of your other governmental funds, like our Strategic Opportunities Fund and our Strategic Reserves Fund. And you can see at the end of 2017, we had, in the general fund, we had 400 days of cash sitting on hand. So what that means is if all your revenue spigots turned off all of a sudden and you just weren't collecting any more money, how many days could you survive without drawing your account down to zero? And Kenmore could survive for 400. Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking at the average. We could survive for about 250 days. Woodinville for 50 years. But, look at us compared to the other cities. So this is one reason why we have a AAA bond rating. Standard & Poor's looks at things like this and says, okay, you have strong fund balance, so we're going to give you a AAA bond rating. And then these are fixed costs as a percent of total expenditures. Now this one is actually a bad news graph for us. So fixed costs, what are those? Well, we get this information from the state auditors. Find fixed costs having to do with employees. They define employees as a fixed cost. Now, technically, that's not true. I mean, you can reduce your workforce if you need to. But for state audit purposes, they count that as a fixed cost. Also, your contractual obligations are considered fixed costs. And essential services like public safety are considered fixed costs. And so you can see that fixed costs make up a big percentage of our budget, which is unfortunate.
So Rob, what do you think the influence of city size, population has on that number? Look at the two smallest cities on population relative to the larger cities.
Oh yeah, that's true. Woodinville's the smallest, but you know, they,
Kenmore, Woodinville, Lake Forest Park versus Kirkland.
There might just be fewer discretionary services going by the state's definition of fixed costs.
yeah, that would be my guess, is these cities they have a bigger tax base, so they can afford more discretionary services.
I mean, they can spread their fixed costs across a wider, larger base than cities, small cities like Kenmore.
Oh, yeah.
and Lake Forest Park.
That's good analysis, yeah. This graph is probably the least helpful of all, but this is intergovernmental revenue that we get, mostly from the state. So we get a little bit of liquor tax from the state. We get, this doesn't show gas tax because gas tax is general fund, but we also get a little bit of state sales tax. No, I'm sorry.
Well, we get some criminal justice revenues.
And where is that? Is that sales tax or is that?
There's a criminal justice sales tax piece that we get.
Okay.
It's a portion of the sales tax, but we also get some revenues from the state that are for public safety purposes, for special programs that the
That's right.
police department conducts for at-risk children, domestic violence, some things like that.
As you can talk,
not very much.
yeah, as you can see, we're talking about small numbers here. This is 4% of our revenues. But Shoreline is somehow bringing it in. We need to figure out what Shoreline's doing. So,
Do we get any revenue off of special tax assessment districts like parks or transit districts?
no. Okay, and then this is the fund balance as a percent of total expenditures. And this graph would look way different if Woodinville wasn't there. Because Woodinville pulls up the average quite a bit. We would be above average if it wasn't for Woodinville. So maybe we should have done median or something here in this case. But yeah, so this is, again, your piggy bank, how much money you have at the end of each year compared to your expenditures. Another graph I showed was compared to revenues, but this is compared to expenditures. Yeah, and then this is similar. This is your ending cash equivalents over total expenditures. So very similar graphs here. So, okay, is that really exciting stuff or what? So those are some of the comparisons I wanted to show you. Any questions or thoughts or any impressions you've gleaned from this? Yeah? Where does it put Kenmore? I mean, how do all these numbers paint Kenmore?
Well, one of the takeaways for me in looking at this, and gets in part back to the size question, but it really gets back to when I look at the property tax per capita, or leveling it out in any way, It looks like most cities are managing that within a pretty narrow band. That doesn't surprise me too much, given that that's the most publicly sensitive number. And where we see increases or larger expenditures or program support in other cities, it looks like they're financing that through sales tax. So, and the other way to look at that is they're keeping their property tax low by taking advantage of higher sales tax. At least that's what the numbers are telling me. Whether that creates an option or an opportunity for Kenmore, probably not, but I think it helps explain some of the numbers and why we look different from particularly places like Woodinville and Kirkland that have that option that we don't, at least not today.
Okay.
Well, I think it informs our urban planning or planning for future development of the city and targeting certain properties that we talked about, not only developing them to increase their highest and best use and increase the amount of property taxes they're generating, but also, like Woodinville, once those properties are developed, whether it's retail or some other purpose, it can be generating much higher sales taxes as well and other revenue. So I think all of that really informs the Planning Commission's decisions and recommendations quite a bit.
Yeah, Kirkland and Bothell have very specifically and purposefully worked on increasing their sales tax revenue through various investments, because there is no limit on what you can realize with sales tax, but there is a 1% limit on what you can realize with property tax. So utilizing property that the city might have, which probably you don't have, I don't know, if there's any way to attract retail business, that would actually be extremely beneficial for the city.
It may not be intuitive when you think about it to begin with, but when I looked at our debt service and the amount of debt we have, that looks real good from a bond perspective. But when you think about a city like Bothell in particular, which has a higher debt, are they incurring debt to invest? And is that how they're getting their, if they're investing in options that would increase their sales tax or increase their assessed property value, that's something that would that you use that debt for, and maybe we're underutilizing that.
That's very specifically what Bothell did.
Yeah.
For their downtown development.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and I remember the city manager prior to Jennifer Phillips telling me that, I'm trying to remember now, but the investment, the private sector investment to city investment ratio was pretty high. It was like 10 to 20 times higher. So for every dollar they put downtown street reconfiguration, they got, I don't remember the number, but it was something like $20 of private sector new investment. So they went from just kind of strip malls and an old safe. Yeah. They went from Hello? Okay, good. They went from strip malls and the low density to the much higher density, and they got tons more property value on that. And one nice thing about the state law, on property tax, is you do have that 1% limit on, but new construction is icing on the cake. So the 1% limit does not apply to new construction. So if a $10 million building gets built in Kenmore, then that's all new property tax revenue to us and does not get counted in the 1% limit. So
The 1%, and sorry, this is refresher, but explain again what the 1% is on. Is that I thought is it growth in the dollars that we can assess? So the assessed value, say the market goes crazy and everybody's home values go up 2 times, that doesn't change the dollars that we bring in.
correct.
It,
Yep.
it just means that the taxes that people are paying as a percentage of their actual property is, as long as everybody goes up evenly, is lower.
The rate
Yes.
goes down.
Yeah.
Actual assessed rate goes down.
Yeah, the
in
assessed
order to
rate.
keep
The rate
the
goes down.
realized revenue at that capped growth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, it's, you know, it's the, remember that one equation I did? Times base equals revenue. And so, in this case, the base is AV, assessed value. And if we're limited to, and this is what's limited to the 1% growth. The total collected is what's limited to the 1% growth. And so if this doubles, then the rate gets cut in half. In fact, when I first started here in Kenmore, I'm about to kill myself here. When I first started here in Kenmore, our property tax rate was like $1.60 or somewhere in that neighborhood, $1.60 per thousand, and now we're about $1. So our rate has gone down. Why? Because assessed value has gone up a lot. So,
Rob, I feel like it might be worth clarifying. The gentleman who gave public comment earlier actually stated some misinformation. The whole purpose of that cap, like 20 years ago when it was implemented, it's not illegal to charge over the 1%. He kind of alluded to that was against the law. But in reality, the purpose of that law was so that we would go to the taxpayer for every bit of revenue that we need. So going to the taxpayer for a levy lid lift is very specifically the reason for that cap. That it's not illegal to do that.
oh, I didn't hear him say that, but
Yeah.
yeah, so it is okay to go to the voters to go above the 1%. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, you can do that, or you can use the bank capacity if you have it, which we have done for the last 2 years. But I'm
Do you all remember us
pleased that you
talking about
clarified that.
Bank capacity, yeah.
bank capacity? Darlene, were you here when we were talking about bank capacity? Okay, so just in a nutshell, does anybody want to try to explain it? So the city actually went for 9 years without even taking the 1%. So they did 0% for 9 straight years. But what they did is they banked it, meaning they said, well, we're not going to take the 1% now, but we're reserving the right to take it in the future. That's called banked capacity. And so the city actually tapped into banked capacity in 2019 and 2020. So we did a 3% increase in 2019 and a 3% increase in 2020. We tapped into those 9 years where we didn't do any increase at all.
Do we have a comparison of the rate across these cities? The rate, or I guess it would be the revenue divided by the assessed value.
Yeah, it's easy to get the rate. You can look them all up on the assessor's website, which we will. I found that it's not super helpful to look at rate because assessed values are so different. Like we're going to have a higher rate than Kirkland. Why? Because their their property values are way higher than ours. So that's why we try to look at it at a per capita basis or some other way. But we're happy to get you those rates.
I could imagine that that's where the sales tax issue comes in. If you've got that big sales tax revenue coming in, you can drive down that rate.
Sure.
And that's what I think a number of these cities are doing when you look at those relatively low rates, or look at, they have a standard rate that looks consistent across cities, but their overall expenditure in the programs they're able to support is higher. I think it's the sales tax, when you look at those, that's driving that up and keeping the assessed value particularly for single family, down, or at least level.
I think it is worth noting that all of those cities except Woodinville, their lines cross too. And their lines, in some cases, cross earlier than Kenmore. So that's absolutely the case almost across the board, and that's the way the system was designed. So we're not facing anything different than any other city.
Yeah. Shoreline went through a financial sustainability process in 2014, and they had a committee like you, and they created a plan. And so their lines are not crossing for a while. Why? Because they went through a financial sustainability plan process. And it had multiple components to it. Are you interested in seeing shorelines? Yeah,
Absolutely.
we're happy to get you that. It's pretty interesting. What they said is, in this year, we're going to do this, and 2 years later, we're going to do this, and 4 years later, we're going to do this. And they're following their plan. So,
Can you scroll back up to the first?
is it this one or the
Yeah,
charts?
yeah, that one.
Okay.
I just wanted to look at. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that the ways that we collect money to pay for those things lined up, especially with the way that 1% cap affects rate, right? Like, we're investing in capital to raise property value, but then if we're not making money on that property value, but that's where the property tax is going into operations and not capital. I just wanted to be sure of that.
Yeah, and like Bothell, they went into debt to build all their to reconfigure their downtown and everything, but they also have to service the debt. So they've got to have a revenue source to make the debt payments. Okay, so we have, oh yeah, go ahead, Lynn.
Sorry, one more. There's some information out there, I think it's WCMA. I don't remember specifically, but there's information out that says what the average cost of servicing a citizen is. So every one of us, we require services from the government, and there's a specific cost for that. And typically that cost far exceeds any additional revenue we're going to get in property tax or anything else. And so I just wonder if there's any way to find that information, because it's very relevant to really trying to encourage growth. And I think there's even some cities out there who have tamped down growth kind of for that reason. But I don't have that research. I'm just wondering if you guys might have it.
In that.
I haven't seen anything like that specifically, but I think there's a way to kind of put that together. I'm sure somebody probably has. This
Yeah.
sort of leads into your price of government discussion.
Yes. Okay, so I want to take a look at price of government, and then I want to talk about the expenditure side of the equation. So we've been spending most of the whole night talking about revenues. We also want to talk about the expenditure side of the equation. But let's just take a quick look at the price of government graph. And it's right here. And I think you've got it sent to you, actually like more than a week ago, right?
Do you want me to pass it out?
Sure. So price of government,
Read that.
the price of government is not the be-all, end-all. And this is only Kenmore. I want to emphasize that. This price of government graph is only Kenmore city government. So it doesn't include the state or Sound Transit or King County. It's just Kenmore. And so what is price of government? It's actually a book that was written probably about 10 years ago, and Governor Gary Locke really subscribed to it. And what it says is that in general, your average taxpayer only has so much appetite for taxes as a percentage of their income. And if that percentage goes too high, then the taxpayers revolt. Let's see, where's my, I lost my pen. Did I bring it over here? Yeah. So this is kind of largely academic, but it is just another interesting data point. And I have the price of government book in my office if you're interested in it. But if this is percent of income, and this is time, the book talks about how government, and I don't know what the percentage is, and it depends on what levels of government you're including. Or this could be all levels, local, state, federal. But what happens is you're tracking along, and this is about how much taxes you're paying as a percentage of your income. But then, you know, the government, they like to do stuff. They like to add stuff. They want to do more things, and they want to add more services. And so they might add more services, add more taxes. There's this imaginary appetite limit where if it starts getting close, the taxpayers revolt and they beat it down. And sometimes they beat it down maybe lower than it even was before. And then it eventually climbs back up. But over time, there's just this general equilibrium of where taxes are over the long period, and they kind of stay around that line. And again, it depends on whether we're talking about state, local, fed. So because citizens don't differentiate the different levels of government, right? They don't compartmentalize. And sorry, this mic's going out. Compared to the county or the state, group it all together. It's not super helpful to look at Kenmore all by itself, but I did want to show this graph. And so I don't have it up on the screen, but you can see what Kenmore household income has done. That's the yellow line, and we got this data from the census. But Kenmore household income has been climbing, and our taxes have not been climbing at the same rate as income. And so the left axis is actually what it is it's all of Kenmore's taxes, and it doesn't include our one-time things, but it's just all of our Kenmore taxes across those three funds: general fund, street fund, surface water fund, divided by Kenmore's total income. So we took average household income, we took per capita average income and then multiplied it times our population, and that's how we got this percentage here. And so because incomes have been going up faster than our taxes, our price of government has been going down. Now, has price of government been going down overall? No. What's an example of price of government not going down? I can think of a couple. McCleary. So the state really socked it to King County on the McCleary decision. So McCleary decision is that Supreme Court decision that said that government has to pay more for education, and so they had to comply with a court ruling, and the state legislature. And by the way, you know that 1% property tax cap? The state also has to comply with that, except for they exempted themselves from that in order to comply with McCleary, and they put a big disproportionate burden of McCleary on King County. So our property taxes went way up when the state legislature decided to comply with the McCleary decision. And then when Sound Transit went into effect, our taxes went up again as well. Sound Transit 3, ST3, added at least 3 new taxes. I think it's only 3, but they added a new property tax, new sales tax, and new motor vehicle excise tax with Sound Transit 3. And so, and McCleary and Sound Transit happened relatively close in time together. So people in King County saw a big jump in their overall taxes when those two main things happened. So, but on the federal side, what's been going on income tax? Anybody want to? I actually don't know. I can't remember what's going on with my income. My rebate isn't any different than it normally has been, but so.
It hasn't changed much for most people. Maybe slightly down for middle class, but hasn't really changed.
Oh, okay. So thoughts on price of government? If we're only looking at Kenmore, is it helpful or is it a waste of time? Be honest. It's just a perspective. Yeah. So.
I think the challenge is for us and for the city council, any proposal is communicating like the depth of information that we're getting here, right? Like, well, raising your taxes or property taxes is really like, we're behind 6 years, you've been underpaying, like that's not something that's easily communicable, right? Like, well,
Not to mention not relevant for those of us who just moved in.
right.
It's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh, you got to enjoy
Yeah.
6 years of low taxes, and now that I'm here and just got a nice hefty mortgage that I can barely afford.
Yeah,
You
so
know.
it's tough, right? Because you want the property value to grow up, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to take advantage of that.
Mhm.
So, to answer your question, yes, very helpful, but starting to try and turn my wheels on how to action that message
Right.
is hard.
I think if we showed this graph to your average taxpayer, they would go, well, that doesn't mean a whole lot because my state and regional taxes are going up, so I don't know.
Well, the state and regional and ST3 and the school fees don't pay for the services here in Kenmore. So I think that's the point of this is all those other taxes, yes, your taxes are going up for all of us. It's because of all of these other things, and all of those other things don't pay for the roads here.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is the point.
I think we're going to be fighting public perception, whether we, however we cut this. And public perception is always, I pay too much in taxes. And I think if we ask the public, where are those lines today? It's going to be a lot closer than what it shows on that graph. In terms of the perception, I think, out there, I mean, that's something to test in the public engagement, is what is the capacity out there? How far apart are those lines? I suspect in most people's minds, we're probably closer to that upper limit than, that would make the argument for increased taxation, particularly taxes that are directly onto the immediate awareness of the public in their pocket are going to be difficult to try and achieve.
There's tax fatigue
Yes.
going on right now.
Yeah.
I think there's absolutely, we could make excellent arguments could be made in terms of the types of services you get through the city impact you more directly and more personally than some of these other things. But I'm not sure that's going to be persuasive enough to have people say that they're willing to pay more taxes in Kenmore than they are. There's a public education process that has to happen there, but I think that's a difficult one. I haven't seen anybody be terribly successful in that in most jurisdictions.
And we just did a citizen survey a couple of months ago. Did we share that with you? I don't think we did. Oh, we need to share that with you.
I was wondering about that too, because that was really informative.
Yeah.
And I thought we sent something out maybe too early, and it didn't catch anybody's attention. But I think it'd warrant looking at it now, and since we've gotten into this process.
But we asked people
Yeah.
like how they feel about Kenmore taxes and Kenmore services. We'll get that to you. Do you mind jotting that down?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Do you think people are more favorably disposed towards taxes if they know the tax revenues would go for a specific purpose rather than just general operations?
That's a good question. I was going through that in my mind myself. What are people sensitive to? It's like price sensitivity in economics. If you ask them to pass a bond levy, like Harborview does periodically, do you want to have trauma care in King County? Yes, I'll pay a tax levy for that. There are things that people, particularly, as you said, if you can link the service you're going to get to the tax you're going to pay, I think you increase your probability of success there. Same thing with revenue. If you say, okay, we're going to have a special tax assessment related to X and it's going to fund this, you change the question to, do you want to be taxed more, to, do you want this service or do you want this public good?
I think we also have an advantage of, with the politics around, and I forget all the actual names, but the politics around the recent vote on the registration, car registration and tabs and things like that. It's a very easy case to make to say, hey, we voted on this, and so we have a budget shortfall, and roads is what we're talking about, funding roads, which this is no longer funding our roads. So if we as Kenmore want to fund our roads, we need to, and we're not getting money from there, we need to get it from somewhere else. And I feel like most of the battle is done in the narrative, right? The specific dollar amounts, the dollars and cents, people aren't going to be paying as close attention as we are in the actual numbers. But if there's a need, and it's attached to something that is relevant, I drive on the potholes, and this need was not driven by mismanagement of the city, but rather, like changes in politics. Like, I feel like that's a narrative that is very easy to say, like, oh no, okay, the tit for tat, like that makes sense to me. I want nice roads. The funding needs to come from somewhere. It's not coming from the county or the state anymore. So that needs to, that's why we're doing property taxes now, or that's why we're doing these other initiatives.
Okay. All right. Do you want to talk about the expenditure side of the equation now?
Ways.
Well, actually, we found a fun way to talk about it, and it's called priority-based budgeting. And it's a tool or a program or whatever you want to call it that we've been using since 2014. And so just to give you a little bit of background on it. So kind of the old-fashioned way of budgeting, and Lou, you've heard me give the speech before, so forgive me, but the old-fashioned way of government budgeting is line item budgeting. So you have, or what I call inputs, so you have supplies and equipment and professional services and, utilities and those types of things. And in I don't know if it's the old days, but one old-fashioned way of doing budgeting is you said, okay, well, I had $500 budgeted for supplies this year, so I think I need $510 next year for supplies. And you just kind of think that's how much I need, or you increase it by 3% or whatever. And that's old-fashioned line item budgeting, the line item being supplies, equipment, rent, utilities, professional services. So that's no way to budget, right? That's not good budgeting. It's arbitrary. It doesn't make sense. So priority-based budgeting focuses on outputs or outcomes, and it says, what do we want to accomplish? What are our goals? And then let's look at what we're actually doing, and are the things we're doing actually helping us reach those goals? So the first thing we do is the city council develops what they call results. And in your handout there, you'll see those results on
The fourth page, they look like circle maps.
Yeah, those bubble maps.
Bubble maps.
Yeah. So like the first result is access to quality cultural, recreational, educational, and leisure opportunities. And then attractive, planned, desirable place to live and work. And connected, involved, family-oriented community. And there's another one on transportation and sustainable economy and safe and secure community and preserving the environment. And so these were all developed by the city council. And the city council said, these are the things we want to achieve. Okay, and then what we do is we say, okay, well, let's put everything we do into a program rather than a line item. So what are the different programs we have? Well, we have police patrol, that's a program. We have building permits, that's a program. We have parks maintenance, that's a program. And we put everything we do into a program. And once we have those programs defined, then we actually cost those programs. So what is parks maintenance as a program costing us? And that includes staff time. So we track our time as staff by program, and we assign costs to all the programs based on staff time and supplies and rent and utilities and all those. And those all go into costing the program. So once you have the programs identified and costed, then the next step is to score the programs. And so what we do is we take the programs and we score them against those results that you see there, those bubble diagrams. And so we say, how does police patrol stack up against safe and secure community? How does police patrol stack up against connected, family-oriented city? And we give them all scores. And then what we do is once we have all the programs costed and scored, then we create charts. And we put all the programs into what we call quadrants. Uh-oh, did I leave the pen over there again?
I jump over the table.
Thanks, Joanne. So what we say is, okay, we take all of our programs, and the ones that scored the highest are in quadrant 1, and there's Q2, Q3, and quadrant 4, or quartile, I should say. And if you're spending your money where the council priorities are, then your graph should look something like this. So again, these are the higher scoring programs. Quartile 2 are lower scoring than quartile 4. And if we're putting our priorities and our money where the council's results are, this is how the graph should look, or something like that. Do you know what Kenmore's looks like? Is it in there? Is it in your memo?
Yes, it's on page 3 of that memo.
Okay. Joanne, why don't you go ahead and take it from here?
Okay. Well, that was a good overview of priority-based budgeting, and like Rob said, it gave us an opportunity to identify what we do as a city and how much does it cost us to do that, and how relevant is it in achieving those results that the council wanted to achieve for the community. So we did, the first couple of pages of the memo just explain that process to you. But then it should open up a conversation about where you're allocating your, finite resources. And are we really spending our resources on those programs that are achieving the results or influencing the results that we want? And so this outcome of these quartiles kind of helps you identify those. And you can, on the third page, ask yourself, which are of the highest priority in achieving what's expected, all the way down, are we spending to achieve our results? Are we overspending in areas that are not paying off for the community? So having gone through this exercise, the staff's really just completed it recently, and we're still in the kind of the process of really digging into the data to try to find out what it tells us, and we haven't, come up with any conclusions or action steps yet. But this is how our quartiles came out, looking at just the general fund and the street fund. So you can see that we're actually spending more of our resources on quartile 2 programs. But we have very little in quartile 4, which is good.
That's good,
It's very good.
One note on the score, one note on the, hello? I'm not allowed to talk in this yeah, I'll do it. One note on the scoring is, it's kind of like the, one note on the scoring is, it's kind of like the fox and the, watching the hen house if city staff are scoring their own programs, right? And so here's how the scoring works. We, the departments actually do score their programs, but then we have other departments come and also look at those scores. It's called peer review. And then we also, this year, for the first time this year, we actually brought in some members of the community to help us with what we call the peer review scoring. And the members of the community and staff from other departments then looked at all those scores and said, does that make sense? And the scores were either raised or lowered, probably in more cases lowered, based on what we call the peer review. So we had, I think, 4 or 5 citizens come in and help us.
And some council members.
Yeah, and some city council members come and help us with the scoring. So, let me just say one more thing. So the other thing is, priority-based budgeting is helpful in 3 ways. One is just the snapshot picture. Are we spending our money where our priorities are? And that just kind of tells you if you are or aren't. Our distribution is pretty typical, we're told. The Center for Priority-Based Budgeting is nationwide, and they said it's quite common to have your quadrant 2 higher than your quadrant 1 spending. So number 1, it just kind of gives you a gauge of are you spending your money where your priorities are. But number 2, if you need to make cuts, you can use priority-based budgeting. You could say, I don't know, I'm just making something up. You could say, well, you know what, maybe we should cut police patrol. Okay, well, let's take a look at that. How does it score? What quartile is it in? Oh, it's in quartile 1? Do you really want to cut something that's in quartile 1? Then the third reason for priority-based budgeting is if you want to add something. So let's say we want to add, maybe we want to tear out all the asphalt on 522 and fill it with flowers. And so how would that score? Oh, not very, it's going to be quartile 4, so do you really want to put, and what are you going to cut to make room for all those flowers? Are you going to cut a cop, or are you going to cut back on building inspections, or, what are you going to do? So the priority-based budgeting through the scoring helps us in the cuts and the adds process.
Rob, one of my questions is some of these programs are really, really big, like policing, and some are smaller, like reception. Like the smaller one, like reception, that's not going to be a full FTE. So it looks like a couple of these programs are going to be partial FTEs, which means how would we really cut a piece of a person who provides a service? Like if you cut that service, are we going to cut 0.2 of their FTE, or I don't know.
It's part of the discussion for sure. Right. So she's jumped ahead to the last few pages of the handout that show how the programs stacked up in the different quartiles. So I printed out for you which programs and what their costs were in each quartile. But what I want to show you too, and Tila is going to turn on the projector for you, is a way you can kind of dig into these more if you decide you want to do this, and I can give you access to this tool online. Go ahead.
I found it fascinating that when we identified our programs, it turns out we provide 180 programs. So, kind of a lot for a little city our size. But
One other observation I would make, kind of looking at this list, is the first thing I saw after I looked at the quartile graph, as I looked at the second quartile in the police contract, is just monstrous compared to everything else. And I would say that if you were to score, again, thinking on the margin, if you were to score like one more police, that might score lower because the incremental benefit to serving those priorities is not nearly as high as the first cop. So cop number 1 probably scores very high in that first quartile, but cop number 10 may not score as high as that first one. So it probably did make it into, like, on average, but I would say that some of the, if you were thinking about it on the margins, some of those dollars, I would say the first half of those dollars or maybe more might belong in the first quartile. So I think just looking at that one line, Kenmore's probably doing better aligned on this than this would necessarily imply.
That police contract's always been kind of a challenge within this process because it covers so many services and covers all the police personnel. And we've gone back and forth between trying to break it apart and look at those programs individually. And now we've gone back to just looking at the contract because there's nothing we can pull out of the contract to reduce it unless it's staff.
Right.
So this representation up here is an online tool, and it's kind of bright and hard to see, but across here are those same results that you see in those bubble charts. And, oh, thanks, Rob. And this is just an interesting graphic and way to look more into these programs. So you can click on each of these, and then it will give you those smaller bubble chart definitions, which are how we achieve each of these larger ones. So you can click through there, and all of these change. And you can look at a plot of all of the city's programs down here. Ooh. That's not coming across very well. Yeah, I can try and refresh it. Where's the refresh button?
Might be Internet Explorer.
You know what? I think it is because it's Internet Explorer.
Yeah, because Internet Explorer doesn't have HTML5, which is what most of these apps are based on.
Yeah, usually I'm using Google for this.
You said this is available online?
Yes, it is. I can give you all a login if you would like to explore this further. So what this is supposed to be doing is down here graphically, these are all the programs of the city. The darker the program, the more it influences that result that you're looking at. The lighter the program, the less influence it has. The larger the program, the more it costs. The smaller the program, the less it costs. So see this big block right here is the police contract. So it's big. It doesn't have a huge impact on desirable place to live and work.
Sorry, the color is the score of alignment, and then the size is
the value or the cost.
Got
right,
it.
the dollars associated with it. So if you're looking at safety, the safety result, and you come down here, you will see that it's darker than many of these other ones. So administration is lighter because it's not influencing the safety result as much as the police contract is influencing. So the different shades give you an indicator of how much influence that program has on the result that you're looking at, and the size indicates the cost of it in relationship to everything else. And it's really kind of fun then to look around at some of these, and you can click on them and you can get additional information about that program. It'll tell you the personnel costs and the non-personnel costs and the score, the dollars. So it's just not happening right now on Internet Explorer. But so here would be an example. Under police contract, it'll show you kind of a description of it, what the total cost is, I don't know what that .04 FTE, that's more in the management of the contract, not the personnel being paid for by the contract. So some of my time gets allocated to managing that program. And then there's, that probably wasn't a good example, but you can look at all of these other tabs to see where those costs are coming from and going and what's rolling up into it. So if that was something that would be interesting to you to sort of look around and kind of dig into, like, what's this program? Why does it cost so much? And how many FTEs are associated with it? I can set up a login for you.
Super interesting.
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. All right, I'll do that. But what I provided in the memo is just really a brief, just sorted chart of the different programs that are in the different quartiles, so I'll give you kind of a snapshot. You might, you might find something that really causes you to say, why is the city doing this? If it's a lower quartile and it's not achieving the results, you can see the results. It might be really achieving one result, but has no bearing on any other result. So police contract doesn't necessarily drive diversity and sustainable environment or some of those other things, but it's really key for public safety.
And sorry if you mentioned this, but are these different, the different initiatives, or what are these called? The
Programs?
the
Oh,
priorities.
the results, and we call them results.
Sorry,
and
the,
result
so
maps.
the result maps, are these weighted differently in scoring?
They are slightly weighted differently. Yes, they are. Yeah. You had that conversation with Steve about weighting them from the survey.
Yeah.
As a result of the survey.
So we really need to get you the survey, the citizen survey that was done, because we actually wanted to get the citizens' opinion on these results. On these, how many results are there? Like 7? We wanted to get, our residents to score these results, and surprise, surprise, they made the public safety one the highest, and it was like in its own category. So we said, well, what if we did weight those based on how the citizens, the survey respondents, scored them? And so we gave public safety a 1.2, I think, and then we gave others a 1.0, and then we gave others a 0.8 weighting. And turned out that it didn't really change the graph as much as we thought it would, did it?
It didn't change. I think it impacted maybe a handful of programs.
Great question. It took me 5 years to ask that question.
On the page with the quintile payments breakdown, is there a way that we could pay for everything in Q1 and 2 by like dropping and like doing nothing in Q3 and 4, like with the city like shut down? Like in sort of in a way, like we looked at, there's no way that we're going to increase sales tax, right? We don't have any functional lever there. Let's say that. Let's say that the city council or the public is going to vote down any tax, right? Like if we were to say there's nothing we can do from a revenue standpoint, is that how you guys would look at this? Would it be like Q4's gone? And then like how far would we have to eat into Q2 and 3 to be sustainable for sort of the like?
Some of these things are legally required, like public defense, you cannot get rid of.
Yeah, that's actually
Right.
the exact line that I looked at that I thought like was interesting that it was in Q4. That would be like, you have to do that.
You
in
will
the
find,
Constitution.
those, because one of the other, some of the other attributes we have to look at when we're scoring these programs are they mandated for one
Yeah.
purpose? They might not be achieving any result that we care about, but they're mandated to do. How much reliance is on the city to provide that service? Or is there someone else who could be providing that service? Is there cost recovery associated with it? You might want to say, we're not going to do this anymore, but there's revenue associated with it, so then that revenue goes away as well. So those are other considerations that go into these programs and scoring.
That tells me that you're understanding this, which is good.
And it seems like this is more just like it's helpful. It's not a hard line. You know, you start from the bottom and move up, or start from the top and move down. It's just the graph should look this shape.
Yeah.
And to make sure that you are prioritizing based on what you set out to prioritize.
Yep. But you're right, there are some things that are certainly discretionary. Human services, arts, business licensing, so trees,
Don't
junior
need
high
any of
school
those.
dance sponsorship.
So it's one more tool to give you information to understand what the city's doing and what it's costing the city to do it, and to help you think about, is that really what we need to do to achieve what we want for the community? That's how we try to look at it as well.
What does it cost the city to do this program?
Yeah.
The licensing fee for this is $20,000 a year.
Plus staff time to do all the ranking and everything.
And we do the ranking every other year because we do a 2-year biennium budget. Yeah. So we not only get their software, but we actually have live people that meet with us by phone and by teleconference and stuff, so. All right.
Well, it's 8:25. The 2 hours went quickly.
Yeah. Any questions on priority-based budgeting or any thoughts? So we hope that you'll want to use this tool too. So if there's things that you as a task force want to cut or add, hope not add. But if there's things you want to cut, you can use this as a tool. And you can say, well, maybe we should cut X. And we can say, well, how does it score? And you can have that conversation. So this is a tool that's supposed to be helpful to you. So, okay.
I think it is a very valuable tool. One use, I think, as we start getting into the community outreach, being able to market to them and have them understand maybe a group of scenarios of some of the tough decisions that you may have to make in order to close the gap that you can't do through revenue. There's going to be choices that need to be made, and I would be amazed if you could not. You're going to have to take some stuff out of probably out of 2, for sure. So when you get into those sorts of tough choices, having some options. Here's column A, here's column B. Something has to go here somewhere. And based upon the tool and based upon community feedback, we would recommend, the city would recommend, would make a recommendation. Or ask the community, given these choices, what do you value the most? That, I think, would be very helpful in getting a buy-in to whatever the final solution is.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because you can look at these too, and not just, cut or not cut, but is that something that someone else in the community could provide, and maybe the city could partner with them or turn it over to them? Maybe we don't have to be in the business of doing that. So lots of ways to use that data and information.
Yeah, and calling things out that way
What's-
may be the way that you have people step forward and make an offer, or come up with an idea of, okay, here's an alternative. The city doesn't need to necessarily do this. My organization would step up and take some piece of that. But until you put it out there, that these are the things that are priority and these are the things that we have to think about cutting, you're probably not going to get those offers or get people even thinking about it.
Yeah, so I hope you'll dig into that data. There's a lot of data in here if you're a data person, and you'll find it interesting and maybe come back with some thoughts or suggestions.
Yeah, and so we'll send you the login information on how to access this. So,
Just one more comment. I think from the public perception standpoint, just things like this go a long way to show how the city is well managed. You know, like as a voter, most voters don't have time to dig into all of the detail and read how many pages was that thing? Several hundred, a couple hundred pages of a budget.
That thing.
Yeah. You know, it's a lot of information, and to the extent that we can communicate to voters that the city is well managed, we're being fiscally responsible, and we're aligning those priorities correctly, then when a proposal is made and the city council is putting something up for vote or trying to get public support from a decision that they are making, these kinds of things at a high level, see, you know, like these are the results of government that we are aiming for. Our budget is aligned that way. It just is one more thing to add to the reputation of Kenmore that this is a well-run, well-prioritized government, which sitting on the council, sitting on this task force, that impression has been reinforced over and over again. I feel like every time I have a question or have an idea, it's like, oh, it sounds like that's already been considered, thought about, like, and obviously there's more work to do, but overall just really impressed with how well everything's been put together and how well thought out and how well these priorities are established. And hopefully we can communicate that that has the rigor that you guys have done to anybody else that would be involved. So thank you.
I know we just did a community survey, but is there a standard one that you do, like with each biennium, that says what the citizens are most interested in and whatnot?
Yeah, we haven't set it up on a regular schedule. We just did one early December. And the last time we did it before that was in 2016. So we don't have it on a regular schedule. I'd like to. But we do always have a set of standard questions we ask in the survey.
What's the participation rate of the survey based on the population?
They try to get a statistically valid sample size, and in our case, it's 300. And so they just call until they get 300 respondents. Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely get that survey out to you probably tomorrow. And I want to just remind you, our next meeting is the 10th. So on the 10th, we will be starting to get feedback from management partners. They've been doing an enormous amount of work in the background. They've interviewed council members, they've interviewed department heads, they've taken input from staff, they've looked at our line items and our budget, they've looked at contracts and ways that we do business. So they're bringing all this together, and I think we'll be getting feedback from them, or at least some beginning ideas on March 10th. It's our next meeting, so that'll be pretty exciting. And then we have our first public meeting on March 17th, and I wanted to bring that to your attention too, because right now the public engagement schedule says week of March 16, date to be determined. The best date for management partners and for us, and we hope for you, would be then Tuesday the 17th. The council meeting on the night of the 16th.
So note that is a public meeting for the public to come and hear us talk and hear the management partners' findings. You don't have to come to that. Hope you will, but because I think you'll get a lot of insight when you see the public come. And one caution here is we don't, in my entire career, we don't have a great track record of a lot of public showing up to budget meetings. So we're gonna.
I know how to clear a room when I start talking about budget.
So we'll promote the heck out of it, but we may only get like 9 people or something. So we'll do our best, but hey, 9 people, we'll take it.
Okay. Is there anything else for tonight?
Just so that outreach plan that we handed out last time, if you have any thoughts or comments, just email us. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
So much.